Hello. We're now in a position to finish off adding debug support by writing out our sequence points. So, as I mentioned earlier, we need to write one sequence point for each of our instructions we emit. And when we emit an instruction, we write out multiple IL statements. To add a sequence point, first of all, we need to create a new sequence point object. And a sequence point takes a couple of arguments. It's the instruction we want to add the breakpoint to, and the document which represents our source code, which is our main.bf file in this case. So we need a document, and we're going to need an instruction. And the way you get the instructions is we can do il.body.instructions and then pass in the index of the instruction we're interested in. So for example, that would be our first index, our first instruction. So, however, we haven't actually written out the instruction yet because it's the very first instruction we want to add our breakpoint to, because we stop before we carry out this command. So what we need to do is work out what the index of this command is going to be, and we know that's going to be just the number of commands plus 1. And because it's 0 bound, that's going to work out it's been plus 1. And then when we write our sequence point, that will be what we're interested in. So obviously we need to write the sequence point out after we've emitted instructions. So I'm going to do it right at the bottom here. So we're going to have to pass document in as an extra parameter. We haven't got that yet. We'll have to create that in a second. So that gives us our sequence point, and then we can add the sequence point to our code. So body method debug information sequence points add. So we work out the index of the next command we're going to add. We add those commands in. We then create a sequence point based on our original source code, and then we add that sequence point to our list of sequence points. So there's a few other jobs we need to do. First of all, we need to define this document. Obviously, that's not going to compile at the moment. So we're going to create a new document, and the document as a parameter takes the full path to your source code. Source code. So we also need to pass that in as an argument to this method. So tag that on the end. That must be it there. So that's the full path to our main.bf file. We then create a document from that path, so that's our original source code, and we then pass that into our method, and we use that to say what the sequence point relates to. It's that document, and then what we need to do is actually tell it within that document whereabouts in the source file this instruction is. So which line? Well, we only have one line, so that's easy. That's just line 1. And line 1. However, we will need to know the start column and the end column. So the end column is going to be the start column plus 1, because all our symbols are only 1 long. So the thing we're missing at the moment is what is the start column. So what we need to do is add that to each instruction. So what we're going to do is end up passing in our instruction as well. And if we add that as a location property to each instruction, we can then say the start column is the instruction's location dot start column. And the end column will be its start location plus 1. So we now need to define what a location is. So this could either be a class or a struct. I'll just stick with the class for the moment. And all we need for now, all we need at the moment is start location. And we'll make it immutable and you can only supply the location via its constructor. And then what we need to do is add that to our instruction. Our interface doesn't have anything at all at the moment, so that's going to be a location, and we don't want it to be settable. And then unfortunately we're now going to have to go for each of our commands and implement that. So the ones which don't take parameters are going to be easy to do. We just copy that code in. Move takes parameters, decrease does it. Right. Let's try and remember which ones we've done. So move, add that as an extra argument. Label as an extra argument. So by convention we'll always make it the first argument in each one. We'll come back to block in a minute because that's slightly more complicated. Need to assign the value. If we miss one out, it doesn't really matter because it won't compile anyway. And then we need to add our properties in. Okay, and then the final one is block. So block already has a location, but we're going to change that to be a class. So that's going to give us better flexibility in the future. If we did want to allow source file sub-multiple lines. And we're going to follow our convention by having that first as well. That's good. Okay, that's all nice and tidy. So we're probably going to have a few errors now because we're not passing those arguments in. Yes, we've got 19. So this is where we're lowering the loops. So we just give it its original location. Okay, yeah, these are a bit more interesting. So the root block will. So this is before the first command. I guess that's 0. Then each of these will be at its current location, which is that. This one, we just need to reverse the parameters. Then we don't, and we also need to create a new object. The new block will be in the same location as the original one. Errors should just take the location in now. Okay, so we need to pass the instruction now. So we're going to have to do this for each of our methods. Like that. Okay. Start location. Yeah, I think maybe start column might be a better name for it. Okay, so that's now emitting our sequence point for our conditional jump. And we need to follow the same pattern for each of our commands. So rather than copying all this code, I think we'll create a helper function. And the helper function, the only thing that's going to vary is which commands we're emitting. So I'll refactor that. Yep. So we'll call that add sequence point. So is that quite right? Yeah. Don't need that bit either. Let's do that again. That looks better. So all we need to do now is have it so when we call add sequence point, we can define which uppercase we're emitting. So what we can do is we'll have a lambda you can pass in, which is given the IL emitter. So let's use action, which has a single argument of IL processor. Emit. And we call that point. So we count the number of instructions we've got. The caller then emits any IO instructions it wants to write out. We can then create a sequence point based on the location of the first instruction that was emitted, and we add that in. So all we need to do now is do the same thing for all the different ones we can emit. So we need to add these two arguments. So unfortunately it's not that many. And then wrap it with our add sequence point. And we've got some compile errors because we're not passing these arguments. Okay, let's build that. Oh, we've missed a couple. Right. Probably doesn't really matter what we do here because this code only gets called in release mode. Anyway, but we can have our best attempt at doing this. So there's another one where we've got the variables all the way down now. Okay, that's built. So now, if we go to Visual VS Code and we go to our file, so I'll just take these breakpoints out. So the reason we can add breakpoints is because normally you can only add breakpoints to C# files and other files it understands about. But I've added a settings file, settings.json, which says I allow breakpoints to be added anywhere in any file. So that allows me to set a breakpoint. And I can add one halfway through a line. We're doing a debug inline breakpoint. And let's add another one there as well. In order to run the program from Visual Studio Code, you have to add two more files, task.json and launch.json. So these are similar to the files you add normally when you're using C# within Visual Studio Code. And it gives the name of the program we're debugging. And we've also got stop at entry, which means it will debug automatically when the program starts. If we run it now, it's building, as you can see down here. It's loaded our symbols in. If we run, we've ran to the first breakpoint, which you can see there. If we continue on, it's gone on to the next breakpoint, and you can see it's increased our variables. So as you can see, we've now got debugging support.